Disneyland Paris is one of the most beautiful theme parks I have ever been to. When it comes to the rides, however, it's a bit lackluster. Many of the Disney classics are here, but a lot of them are missing as well. In this video, I'll be going through both Disneyland Paris and Walt Disney Studios to determine which rides are the best. There were a few rides I missed on my visit that don't have clones back in the US, so these 5 rides will not be on this list. That said, let's rank the 24 rides at Disneyland Paris I did get to go on. Number 24, Avengers Assemble Flight Force. This is easily one of the worst rides I've ever been on. With the arrival of Avengers Campus to Walt Disney Studios, their version of Rock and Roller Coaster was closed and rethemed to this. Right off the bat, the queue is tremendously boring. There is a cool animatronic in the pre-show, but because of how few people there were in the queue, the cast members pushed us through so I didn't get a good look. There are some additional TV screens explaining the story, but it's honestly complete nonsense. Once you're through the bland futuristic queue, you hop on board the ride itself. Here's where the theming truly takes a turn for the worst. This coaster has next to no theming. As soon as you hit the launch track, you plunge into pure darkness, with only a few small screens to act as any sort of theming. Apart from those screens, there is absolutely nothing. It's a far cry from Disney's other Marvel roller coaster over at Epcot, with Cosmic Rewind having plenty of stars, screens, and physical theming. In comparison, this ride just feels empty. Apparently, this has had some stars added since I visited in the summer of 2023, but I'm not sure that would save this ride for me. In the end, it's just a very lazy overlay of a ride that's much better here at Walt Disney World. I rode it twice just to make sure it was in fact my least favorite ride at Disneyland Paris. Number 23, Flying Carpets over Agrabah. This spinning flat ride themed to Aladdin is located right in the center of... Wait, why is this in Walt Disney Studios? It feels totally out of place in this park, with the painted backdrop doing nothing to help it blend in. The ride itself is fine, but the placement of this ride is just bizarre to me. I guess Walt Disney Studios needed a bit more capacity considering how empty it is otherwise, but this just feels wrong. Number 22, Orbitron. Heading over to Discoveryland, this spinning flat ride makes much more sense in this area of the park. The surrounding theming definitely boosted up for me, but in the end, there's not much else going on with this attraction. It does what it needs to do, but that doesn't mean what it does is great. Number 21, Dumbo the Flying Elephant. Of the 3 basic spinning flat rides in the parks, this continues to be my favorite. Partially because it's the original, and also because I love its placement here within Fantasyland. Not much else to say, it's a perfectly fine ride. Number 20, Mad Hatter's Teacups. What sets this apart from the last few flat rides we discussed is the customized experience. You can spin as fast or as slow as you want, which means it doesn't need to be super intense. The theming isn't anything special, but this ride remains a Disney staple that's a necessity at any Disney park. Number 19, Mickey's PhilharMagic. While the queue for this ride is a step down from the one at Magic Kingdom, the show itself remains pretty much identical. Of course, it's in French instead of English, but otherwise there's not much of note in terms of differences. It's still the same entertaining show it is over at Magic Kingdom, just with a bit less theming to boost it up. Number 18, RC Racer. I was surprised how much I enjoyed this. On the surface, it doesn't look like anything special, but once you're on it, it's shockingly intense. You feel like you're floating at the top, and the launches catapult you forwards and backwards. While I did like this ride a bunch, in the end, it is pretty basic and has next to no theming. It was a nice surprise on this trip, but it's not quite deserving of the top half of this list. Number 17, Storybook Land Canal Boats. This is a charming set of dioramas showcasing scenes from classic stories throughout human history. Many of these were later turned into animated Disney movies, but a lot of them are totally original to this ride. While it's a very cute ride, it's not in the best state right now. When I was there was paint falling off and details getting lost. If Disney took the time to really renovate this ride, it could place even higher on this list. Unfortunately, the state of this attraction makes it fall into the bottom 10. Number 16, Autopia. Just like Magic Kingdom, Disneyland Paris also has a slow-moving car ride that takes up way too much space. Jokes aside, this is a fine ride. It's fun for kids and has some decent decoration thrown about. As an adult, I have no desire to revisit the joys of driving, but this ride isn't really meant for me anyways. Number 15, Spider-Man W.E.B Adventure. Ever since it opened, this ride has been pretty controversial. Considering there's already an amazing Spider-Man ride over at Universal Orlando, this ride has some tough competition. And I'll make it clear right off the bat, this ride is nowhere near as good as that one. Universal's Spider-Man takes full advantage of the franchise, with tons of villains, iconic characters, and a great comic book style. The theming here, on the other hand, is a bit dull. It doesn't feel particularly Spider-Man-like, more just a random warehouse in the middle of nowhere. The ride itself improves things a bit though. It's a shooting dark ride where you shoot with your hands instead of a blaster, which can get tiring but is overall an impressive mechanic. The interactions with the environment don't work extremely well, and I think the Spider-Bot storyline is a little lame, but as a whole, it's not a terrible ride. Toy Story Mania is a far better shooting dark ride, but in a park without that attraction, it makes sense to put this here. I do wish Disney made something a bit better for their flagship Marvel IP, but as it stands, this is a perfectly respectable ride. Number 14, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril. The more I think about this ride, the worse it gets. At first glance, this ride looks pretty great. The theming is well executed and the coaster itself looks zippy and fun. Unfortunately, when you're on it, the ride is much less enjoyable. The layout is very similar to a Wild Mouse, with tight turns and whippy maneuvers. That would be fine if not for the over-the-shoulder restraints, which means you'll be bumping your head for much of the ride. The coaster can be enjoyable, but it's hard to focus on that when you're trying to avoid any pain from the restraint around you. If the restraint was changed, this would be a much better ride, but in its current state, it's one of the weaker coasters at Disneyland Paris. Number 13, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is one of those classic Fantasyland dark rides that may come off as a bit outdated nowadays. The theming is cute, but nothing too special, but as a whole, I did find it charming. It's fascinating just how small of a space this ride takes up, which can be said about the next ride on this list as well. Nothing too special, but a fine addition to the park. Number 12, The Voyages of Pinocchio. Like Snow White, this is a very compact and simple dark ride with simple theming. The effects and overall theme are more impressive than Snow White, but not by much. It's a slight improvement that puts it a hair over the previous entry, landing this ride in the upper half of this list. Number 11, Buzz Lightyear Laser Blast. Old-style shooting dark rides have never really been my thing. I've talked about this before, but I find it extremely difficult to know where you're shooting with just a tiny red dot to guide you. Maybe it's just a personal problem, but regardless, that immediately makes this style of ride harder to enjoy. The theming isn't anything special, but it is a unique style for a Disney dark ride. The layout is a bit different than the Walt Disney World version and arguably better with less outdated effects, but for the most part, it feels about the same. It's a decent ride, but not really my thing. Number 10, Star Tours. I know many people are mixed on this simulator, but I've always enjoyed it. The randomized scenes and intense motion make it fun to revisit, along with the humor and visuals boosting up an already great ride. The exterior queue isn't quite as good as the Hollywood Studios version, and in the end, this ride is pretty basic, but I think it's worthy of a top 10 spot. While it's nothing spectacular, everything adds up to make this a pretty solid ride. Number 9, Ratatouille the Adventure. Later cloned here at Epcot, this ride was a Paris exclusive for many years. With it now at Walt Disney World, it doesn't feel quite as special here, but that doesn't make the ride any worse. Compared to the Epcot version, I think this ride is about the same. There are differences obviously, but none of them make either ride the superior version. Revisiting the ride after a few months, I do think I overrated it a bit in my Walt Disney World ride ranking. While most screen rides try to simulate motion during certain scenes, Ratatouille is pretty still throughout. There's so many segments where you're parked in front of a big screen doing nothing in particular. The scale is impressive on both the screens themselves and the physical theming, but I do think the ride vehicles could stand some improvement. That physical theming saves this ride, really making you feel like a rat exploring a massive kitchen. Overall, while there's a lot I'm mixed on, this is a pretty good ride. Not incredible by any means, but a decent addition to Walt Disney Studios. Let's hope I have less complicated thoughts on the next ride on this list. Number 8, Hyperspace Mountain. Oh boy, where do I even begin? From the outside, Hyperspace Mountain looks absolutely stunning. Discoveryland has such a unique aesthetic that's perfectly captured in this one huge structure. As you may have noticed though, it's not very Star Wars-y. That's because this ride was originally themed to the science fiction novel From the Earth to the Moon. At that time, the theming on the inside was much closer to matching the theming on the outside. Now though, this ride has been given a permanent Star Wars overlay. It's clear as soon as you enter the queue that this ride was never meant to be Star Wars themed. It feels legitimately lazy, with sections of the queue feeling straight out of its previous life. The ride itself is an improvement though, with a very thrilling layout and some decent theming. As a whole, while the layout and exterior of this ride boosted up to the top 10, the theming on the inside pulls it out of the top 5. If this decision were reversed, this genuinely may have a shot at the top 3. Otherwise, in its current state, it has to land at number 8. Number 7, Peter Pan's Flight. This is among the best of the classic Disney dark rides, with a great sense of scale and some fantastic physical theming. It may not be very thrilling or intense, but the unique ride vehicle and cohesive theming put it up there with the best at Disneyland Paris. Not much else to say really. Number 6. Crush's Coaster. I really enjoyed this one. That seems to be a hot take based on other opinions I've heard online, but for me, Crush's Coaster is one of the best roller coasters in this entire resort. While the theming drops off a bit by the end, for the most part, it's very well done for a Disney coaster. Honestly, even that final part was more interesting than I expected, with an undersea aesthetic that worked fairly well. The layout is solid too. Not the most thrilling out there, but a good step between intense and relaxing. The biggest downside I can imagine with this ride is how long the lines get, mainly due to how little capacity this ride has. Otherwise, this is a really fun ride, and likely the best original attraction that Disneyland Paris has. Number 5. It's a Small World. I was shocked at how good this ride was. I'm fairly mixed on Walt Disney World's version of this attraction, but the one here completely blows it out of the water. Right off the bat, the exterior facade for this ride is incredibly charming. It's very colorful and fun, with movement as far as the eye can see. Then you get to the ride itself. Immediately, the theming just surrounds you, which is a far cry from the tall, empty ceilings over at the Magic Kingdom. It feels like a much tighter ride, but a very long one as well. It makes the most out of the space it's been given, which makes it a fantastic ride from beginning to end. This is among my favorite dark rides I've ever been on, which was a huge shock to me. Even if you dislike Florida's version, I'd highly recommend giving this one a shot. It's great. Number 4. Phantom Manor. This is Paris's version of the Haunted Mansion, and for the most part, it remains unchanged. It has the same pre-show, much of the same queue, and many of the same rooms within the ride itself. However, there's a good amount that's been added as well. There's plenty of new scenes and animatronics, along with an expanded storyline. Not only that, but the exterior queue for this ride is great. One of my favorite things about Disneyland Paris is how each ride seems to have its own mini-land surrounding it. It makes every ride feel a lot more special, versus Magic Kingdom where everything is packed together. That queue and the additional scenes put this above Florida's version for me, although it does still share some of the same flaws with the Omnimover ride vehicle. Apart from all the random breakdowns, this is a fantastic dark ride and one of the best of the resort. Number 3. Pirates of the Caribbean. If you've watched my Walt Disney World ride ranking, you know this is likely my favorite of the classic Disney dark rides. Like with Phantom Manor, this version of the ride may be even better than the one at Florida. First off, you get to float by the restaurant in the swamp, which is a part of the ride I sorely missed in Florida's version. Not only that, but the ride is a lot longer too. It has most of the same scenes as the one in Magic Kingdom, but with plenty of new scenes added that really elevate the ride. Admittedly, the pacing and story seem a bit off because of those new scenes, but that's really the only flaw I have with this ride. For the most part, it's just a longer, better version of one of the best dark rides I've ever been on. That's not even mentioning the queue, which may just be one of the best lines I've ever been through. Overall, this is a fantastic ride, and a huge standout in the park for me. Number 2. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. As you may already know, I adore the Orlando version of this ride. It's a fantastic mixture of creepy theming and heart-pounding thrill, and for the most part, this clone captures that energy. Unfortunately, the main drawback with the Tower of Terror clones is that they cut one of my favorite moments of the original ride. Over at Hollywood Studios, the doors open and suddenly the elevator begins to move forwards through this seemingly infinite room. It's a mind-blowing effect and manages to build up the tension for the eventual drop. Losing the scene isn't a huge deal, and this ride still has much of what makes the original so great, but it's certainly a step down nonetheless. Not to mention, the exterior queue is pretty bad. It's very compact with not much going on. Other than that, this is still a fantastic ride, and my favorite at Walt Disney Studios. Admittedly, that isn't saying very much, but still. Number 1. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Disneyland Paris may just have the best version of Big Thunder Mountain. This ride is awesome. You board the ride on the main portion of Frontierland, but the ride itself is located on an island across the river. To get there, you travel underground in this long dark cave section, which feels so intense and insane. From there, the layout is pretty similar to Florida's version of the ride, with even more detailed theming that makes a great ride even better. Finally, you end the ride how you started, traveling underground and arriving back at the ride station. That opening and closing makes this ride, with a fast pace and some crazy thrill. Not only that, but the ride feels extremely long as well. If you ever make your way to Disneyland Paris, you have to give this ride a shot. To me, it's the definitive Big Thunder Mountain experience. And that's everything. For more ride rankings, check out this video ranking every ride at Walt Disney World. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.